Welcome to the Deep Dive. We take your sources, dig in, and, well, find the surprising nuggets of knowledge hidden inside. Today, we're plunging into a really fascinating collection of insights, stuff that challenges pretty much everything you thought you knew about how the world works. We're drawing from excerpts of Freakonomics. A rogue economist explores the hidden side of everything. And this isn't your typical economics book, is it? It's more about asking these really unexpected questions and using data, just cold, hard data, to peel back the layers on everyday life.
That's exactly it. The core idea, really, is understanding how people actually behave, not how we wish they would or think they should. And yeah, that often means looking past the conventional wisdom, which, as these sources suggest, it's often wrong. Maybe because it's convenient or self-interested or honestly just tiring to question all the time.
So yeah, get ready for some serious aha moments today. We're about to uncover what really drives human behavior. We're talking cheating teachers, sumo wrestlers, why crime rates suddenly plummeted, even what your name might signal about your life. We're going to use the book's unique approach, focusing on data and incentives as our guide. Okay, let's unpack this. So the sources introduce us to this economist who's not really focused on the usual stuff like stock markets or taxes. He's more interested in the, quotes, stuff and riddles of everyday life. And this unconventional approach, it's key, isn't it, to understanding incentives?
Right. An incentive is basically a push, sometimes small, sometimes big. It urges people to do more of a good thing, hopefully, and less of a bad thing. But, and this is fascinating, they don't always work as planned. There's this great Israeli daycare study. They brought in a fine for parents who picked up their kids late. You'd think that would reduce late pickups, right?
Yeah, makes sense. Punish the behavior you want less of.
But the number of late pickups actually doubled.
Doubled. Wow. So the financial incentive somehow backfired.
Spectacularly. It sort of changed the moral calculation, maybe. Made it a transaction instead of a social obligation. A perfect example of unintended consequences.
Okay, that's a great illustration. And this deep dive shows us how we can use data not just to see incentives, but also to spot, well, cheating. Let's take the Chicago public school system example. They had high-stakes testing. Schools could literally be shut down for low scores. That's a massive incentive.
Huge pressure. And when the pressure is that high, human nature, it creates an incentive to cheat. But the really clever part is how they figured it out, how they detected the cheating. The researchers basically had to think like the cheaters themselves.
How so? What did they look for?
Unusual answer patterns, like whole blocks of identical answers, especially on the harder questions, or, students getting really difficult questions right, but then missing the easy ones. That doesn't add up.
Right, that's a definite red flag.
And another big one, a crazy spike in scores one year, then a big drop the next. The data just screamed inconsistency.
So the numbers really told the story. But was this just about catching the bad apples? Or could it do more?
That's a great point. It wasn't just for catching cheaters. The algorithm, it also helps identify the really good teachers, the ones whose students showed real, actual improvement, especially on easier questions, suggesting genuine learning was happening, not just gaming the test.
Okay, so it had a positive side too.
Absolutely. And the impact. The Chicago system used this data to fire the cheating teachers, and the following year, cheating dropped by over 30%. It shows how powerful data can be when you use it smartly. It can really change a system.
Okay, from teachers under pressure to sumo wrestlers. What's the connection there? Seems like a leap.
Incentives again. It always comes back to incentives. For a sumo wrestler, their ranking is everything. It affects their pay. We're talking over $170,000 for the elite guys versus maybe $15,000 for the lower ranks. And not just money, but respect, status, everything.
Right, so the stakes are incredibly high.
Yeah.
Which leads to this really interesting question the book raises. On the final day of a tournament, you've got a wrestler who's 7-7, right on the edge, the bubble, for keeping that elite status. And he's facing an opponent who's 8-6, already safe, nothing really to lose or gain in terms of rank. Is it possible? Could the 8-6 guy, maybe, let the 7-7 guy win? Just throw the match.
It sounds, scandalous, but the data is. Well, look at the data. Statistically, that match should be about 50-50 odds, right? Roughly even chance for either wrestler.
Makes sense.
But the 7-7 wrestlers, the ones on the bubble, they win those specific matches almost 80% of the time.
80%. That's not random chance.
Not at all. And here's the clincher. When the media starts looking into corruption, asking questions, suddenly that win rate drops right back down to around 50%.
Whoa. So the scrutiny changes the behavior?
Exactly. It strongly suggests, well, it's hard to argue that sumo isn't rigged in those specific high-stakes situations. It's not just about sumo, though. It shows how hidden incentives, Even subtle ones like just keeping your rank can totally warp behavior in any system, really, until something forces transparency, like media attention.
Okay, so we've seen incentives. Now this deep dive pivots to another huge factor, information, or rather, the lack of it, information asymmetry, when one side knows more than the other, and how that creates these massive imbalances in crime, business, even online dating.
Yeah, take the Ku Klux Klan, for example. Founded after the Civil War, grew into this multi-state terrorist group. By the 1920s, they claimed 8 million members. And they weren't just focused on race. Their agenda was much broader. Their power was built on secrecy, intimidation.
But here's something from the sources that really surprised me. Lynchings. They actually went down over time. And there were more lynchings when the Klan was basically dormant than when it had millions of members.
It suggests the Klan maybe carried out fewer lynchings than we commonly think, which is counterintuitive.
So if direct violence wasn't their only or even main tool later on, how was their power eventually broken?
Information. It came down to information. There was this guy, Stetson Kennedy, an infiltrator in the 1940s. He learned everything. Their secret hierarchy, the rituals, the passwords, all the inside stuff that gave them their mystique.
And what did he do with it? He didn't just go to the press?
No, he fed it to the Adventures of Superman radio show.
Superman.
Seriously.
Seriously. Superman exposed all the Klan's secrets on the radio, turned their secrecy, their main weapon, into a source of public ridicule.
So basically, Superman made the Klan look silly.
Pretty much. They lost momentum fast. It perfectly illustrates that quote from Justice Brandeis. Sunlight is said to be the best of disinfectants.
Amazing. Kryptonite via radio waves. Yeah. And this principle, this information asymmetry, it plays out in much more mundane areas too, like real estate agents. An agent has an incentive to sell your house fast, right? Even if it's for a bit less money, because their extra commission on a slightly higher price is tiny compared to the time they save moving on to the next sale.
So their incentive isn't perfectly aligned with mine as the seller.
Exactly. And the data backs this up. Agents tend to keep their own homes on the market longer, about 10 days longer on average, and they sell them for about 3% more than they sell their clients' homes. That's information and incentive asymmetry right there.
So knowing that, when you see a listing described as, say, well-maintained.
Right. That could be code.
Yeah.
It might really mean it's old, but, it's not falling apart yet.
Yeah.
You have to read between the lines.
And online dating. Same thing.
Pretty much the same dynamic. People present information about themselves, obviously wanting to look good. You see huge percentages claiming above average looks, like 70% of women, 67% of men. Statistically impossible, right?
Right. Not everyone can be above average.
Or lots of women claiming to be blonde. It suggests, well, maybe some fabulism, as the book calls it, or just trying to attract attention, like that real estate agent fluffing the description. The information you get isn't always the pure, unvarnished truth.
Okay, we've looked at big systems, secret societies, real estate. Let's zoom way in to something really simple. Bagels. This story about Paul Feldman, the guy who sold bagels on the honor system, it just blew me away. He found about 10% of his bagels got stolen. Okay, maybe not surprising, but get this, his money boxes almost never stolen.
Isn't that fascinating? It speaks volumes about the kind of social math people do around theft.
Why the difference, do you think?
Well, the book suggests that taking a bagel without paying, maybe people don't see it as a crime in the same way. They probably wouldn't just walk out of a restaurant without paying the bill. But a bagel feels different, smaller, less personal.
So it raises this big question. What actually influences honesty when nobody's looking?
Yeah, and Feldman's data offered some clues. Smaller offices, more honest.
Maybe more shame, like everyone knows each other.
Could be. Peer pressure, maybe. And mood. That was huge. Pleasant weather, higher payment rates. But cold weather, heavy rain, holidays like Christmas or Valentine's Day associated with stress, maybe, led to more cheating.
But not all holidays. Like 4th of July, just an extra day off, had lower cheating? Weird.
It is weird. And big events mattered, too. After 9/11, remember, bagel payments actually increased for a few weeks.
Wow. Patriotism.
Empathy.
Maybe some combination. It forces you back to that old philosophical question, right? Plato's Ring of Gyges. If you could be invisible, would you resist temptation? Feldman's bagel data seems to side with Socrates and Adam Smith, actually. About 87% of the time, yeah, people chose to be honest.
87%? That's actually pretty encouraging, isn't it?
It is, surprisingly so.
Okay, shifting gears again. Let's talk about the crime drop in the 1990s. I remember the early 90s. All the experts were predicting this huge surge in crime, this wave of super predators. And then it just didn't happen. Crime rates fell dramatically, unexpectedly. So where did all the criminals go? Yeah, it's one of the big puzzles the book tackles. The sources dive into all the common explanations people gave at the time, and they basically take them apart piece by piece.
Like what? What were the popular theories?
Oh, the roaring 90s economy made crime less necessary.
Okay, plausible.
Turns out, not the main driver. Tougher gun control laws like the Brady Act.
Seemed like a big deal.
Largely impotent, the data suggests. Criminals just got guns elsewhere, black market mostly.
What about policing, like New York City's broken windows strategy? That got a lot of credit.
It did, but crime rates in NYC were actually already falling before those strategies were fully implemented, so timing's off.
Okay. Capital punishment. More executions.
Very little effect, according to the analysis. Executions are too rare, too delayed to be a real deterrent day to day. I mean, the book points out statistically life on death row is actually safer than being an active crack gang member.
Wow. Okay. More police on the streets.
Numbers went up, sure, but proving direct cause and effect is really hard. Often, you hire more police because crime is already rising, not necessarily the other way around.
So if all these popular ideas don't really hold up under scrutiny, what does explain it, according to this analysis?
The book points to two major factors. Big ones, but less obvious, maybe less comfortable to talk about.
Okay, what's the first one?
First, the bursting of the crack cocaine bubble.
Ah, right. Crack hit cities hard in the 80s.
Exactly. And it initially caused this huge spike in violent crime. A lot of it was dealers fighting over turf, really violent stuff. But then the market kind of matured, profits for the street-level guys went down, and the risks stayed incredibly high. So that whole drug game tournament, as the book calls it, just lost its appeal for many. Violence went down as a result. That accounts for maybe 15% of the crime drop, especially among young black men.
Okay, 50%. That's significant, but it doesn't explain the whole drop. What's the second factor?
The second one is, it's the most controversial finding in the book, probably. Legalized abortion.
Right. I remember this causing a huge stir. How do they even connect abortion rates to crime rates 20 years later?
Okay, so it's crucial to understand how they frame this. It's presented strictly as an economist looking at data and efficiency. It's not a moral judgment on abortion itself.
Okay, important distinction.
They draw a parallel, for instance, to Romania back in 1966. Dictator Ceausescu banned abortion. What happened? The generation of children born right after that ban. They were statistically much more likely to become criminals later in life. So much so that that generation was key in violently overthrowing Ceausescu years later.
So the argument is that banning abortion led to more unwanted children who had tougher lives and were more prone to crime.
That's the core of the argument, yeah. Unwanted children, the theory goes, are sadly more likely to face neglect, abuse, environments that correlate strongly with worse life outcomes, including criminality.
So applying that to the U.S., Roe v. Wade legalized abortion nationwide in 1973.
Right. So the generation that would have been born in the years immediately following Roe v. Wade, potentially into difficult circumstances, many of them, they weren't born.
And those individuals would have reached their peak crime-prone years in the early 1990s.
Exactly when the crime rate started its unexpected plunge.
And is there data to back this up beyond the timing?
Yes. The analysis shows that states with higher abortion rates in the 1970s saw the biggest drops in crime in the 1990s. And this correlation holds up even when they control for all those other factors we talked about: policing, economy, guns, etc.
So the analysis suggests this factor accounts for how much of the drop?
A huge chunk. Perhaps as much as half of the crime drop.
Half?
Yeah.
Wow. That is provocative, to say the least.
Extremely. And again, the authors are very careful to frame it as correlation and economic analysis, comparing numbers of abortions to potential future homicides prevented, not as a statement on the morality of abortion itself. But yeah, it's a powerful and definitely uncomfortable finding based on their data.
Okay, let's move on to something that hits closer to home for many listeners. Parenting, a topic filled with anxiety, right? And the sources point out how conventional wisdom on parenting just shifts constantly. And parents are maybe especially vulnerable to experts stirring up fear.
Oh, absolutely. And it ties into how bad we often are, just generally, at assessing risk. Think about it. We worry about really rare things like mad cow disease. Remember that?
Oh, yeah.
But we often ignore much more common controllable risks, like pathogens from improperly handling food in our own kitchens. Risks you feel you can't control always seem scarier than risks you feel you can control, even if the statistics say otherwise.
That makes sense. And the book has this stat that just floored me. About guns versus swimming pools.
Right. If you have both a gun and a swimming pool in your home,
Yeah.
a child is about 100 times more likely to die in the swimming pool than from the gun.
100 times. That's staggering. We focus so much on gun safety, which is important, but...
But water, statistically, is far more dangerous for kids than most people realize. Same kind of risk misperception happens with flying versus driving. Per hour traveled, they're about equally risky. But way more people die in cars each year just because we drive so much more. But flying feels scarier to many.
Okay, so we're bad at judging risk. How does this tie into parenting itself? How much do parents actually matter in the ways we usually think?
Well, obviously, bad parenting, neglect, abuse, that clearly has terrible effects, no question. But the sources suggest that for parents who are already diligent, engaged, trying their best, a lot of the specific things we stress about doing as parents might be, well, kind of overrated in terms of measurable outcomes like test scores.
Overrated? Like what?
There was this huge study, the Early Childhood Longitudinal Study, ECLS, followed 20,000 kids, and it found some really counterintuitive stuff. For example, they looked at kids who won a lottery to get into a supposedly better school versus similar kids who lost the lottery and stayed in their neighborhood school.
And the better school made a difference.
No measurable academic benefit. At least not based on test scores for those kids compared to the ones who lost the lottery. School choice, in that context, didn't seem to matter much academically.
Wow. Okay, so if choosing the right school doesn't matter as much as we think, what does correlate with higher test scores, according to this big study?
Okay, the things that did show a strong positive correlation were mostly about the parents' background and situation. Things like having highly educated parents.
Okay.
High socioeconomic status. So basically being well off.
Right.
The mother being 30 or older when the first child was born.
Why that specifically?
The thinking is it might imply the mother pursued education or a career first, was more settled, perhaps wanted the child more intentionally.
Interesting. What else?
Parents speaking English in the home, parents being involved in the PTA, which might signal engagement with the school system, and simply having lots of books in the home, not necessarily reading to the child daily, just the presence of books.
Okay, so those things correlate positively. What about the things that, surprisingly, didn't seem to correlate much with test scores?
Yeah, this list is just as interesting. Things that showed little or no correlation included. Whether the child's mother worked or stayed home between birth and kindergarten.
Really? That's a big one people debate.
Yep. Also, attending Head Start, the data suggested it wasn't very effective, at least for test scores.
Okay.
Parents reading to the child every single day, taking them to museums, watching TV together, none showed a strong link.
Even reading daily. That's surprising.
I know. And regularly spanking the child didn't correlate with lower test scores.
Seriously.
Yeah, though the book notes maybe parents who admit to spanking are just more honest overall on surveys, which could skew things, who knows, and attending private school versus public or going to daycare. Little correlation found there either.
So taking all that together, what's the takeaway? It sounds like it's less about what parents do day to day.
And more about who the parents are. That seems to be the stronger message from this particular data set regarding test scores. If you, the parent, are smart, hardworking, well-educated, financially stable, your kids are just statistically more likely to succeed academically. Your traits seem to matter more than specific parenting techniques.
But is that the whole story? Does parenting style make no difference at all? The book adds a nuance here, right? With adoption studies.
Yes, exactly. That's a crucial addition, because genetics obviously play a role, especially early on. But adoption studies look at kids raised by non-biological parents, and adoptive parents tend to be, on average, smarter, better educated, more stable than the biological parents who gave the child up.
And what happens to those adopted kids?
While genetics might dominate early school performance, by the time they reach adulthood, the influence of the adoptive parents becomes much clearer. Adopted children are far more likely to go to college, get good jobs, delay marriage compared to similar children who weren't put up for adoption.
So parental influence does matter significantly. Just maybe. Maybe it plays out over the longer term. Or affects broader life outcomes beyond just test scores.
Precisely. It suggests that the environment and the type of parenting provided by those adoptive parents does make a big difference in the long run, even if the day-to-day tactics we worry about show less correlation with early test results. It's complex.
Okay, final topic. Something really personal, seems almost like fate. Your name.
Right. The sources kick off with some pretty wild anecdotes. These brothers named Winner and Loser Lane. Seriously?
Big winner and loser, wow.
And a girl supposedly named Temptress, though maybe misspelled from Tempest. These make you ask the core question: does the name itself affect your child's life? Or is the name just a reflection of the parents' lives, their circumstances, their expectations?
And this is where the data gets really interesting, and it hammers home that point about correlation versus causation again, doesn't it?
Is absolutely critical point. The data does show, on average, someone with a distinctively black name, think Imani or Deshaun, tends to have worse life outcomes, economically speaking, than someone with a typically white-sounding name like Molly or Jake.
Okay, that sounds bad. Like the name itself is holding them back.
But, this is the key finding, the analysis concludes it's not the name itself that's causing those different outcomes.
So what is it then?
It's that the name acts as a powerful indicator, a signal. The kind of parents who name their son Jake often don't live in the same neighborhoods, don't have the same income level or education background as the parents who choose Deshaun.
So the name reflects the starting point, the socioeconomic background.
Exactly. It's an indicator of factors like income, education, maybe single-parent household status, things that do strongly correlate with life outcomes. The name isn't the cause, it's a marker for the environment the child is likely growing up in.
And parents seem to use names to signal things too, right?
Sure.
Their own hopes or expectations.
Yeah, you see that clearly. There are what the book calls aspirational names, people naming kids Harvard or Yale or Princeton.
Trying to signal high expectations.
Right. And then there are those unfortunate examples like shithead or orange jello, pronounced shooteed, and Iran jello, supposedly, which signal, well, something else entirely.
Yikes.
But even beyond those extremes, there's strong correlation between parents' income and education levels and the types of names they choose. The book even lists names more common among high-income, high-education white parents versus lower-income, lower-education white parents, like Catherine versus Kayla or Benjamin versus Cody.
So names follow socioeconomic trends.
They do, and names even shift over time. Names like Cindy or Brittany, which might have sounded upscale decades ago, now tend to correlate more with lower education levels among parents choosing them today. It's a fascinating reflection of social trends.
So the bottom line for you, the listener, is what? Your name itself probably won't determine your destiny.
Right. Probably makes very little difference on its own. But it can be a surprisingly strong signal about your parents' background, their expectations, and the circumstances you were born into. It's another layer peeled back, looking at the hidden side of something simple.
So wrapping this all up,
Yeah.
this deep dive drawing on Freakonomics has really shown us how looking at everyday stuff through this unconventional economic lens, focusing on incentives, data, information, it lets us uncover these hidden patterns, these truths that often fly right in the face of conventional wisdom.
Yeah, we've seen how these powerful, often invisible forces, incentives, knowing more than someone else, even big societal shifts like legalized abortion can shape outcomes in ways that are just completely counterintuitive at first glance. It really is about peeling back those layers of what we just assume is true.
It comes down to asking the right questions, doesn't it? And being willing to follow the data, even when it leads to uncomfortable or surprising answers, whether it's about cheating teachers or sumo wrestlers or crime rates or parenting or names. The world's full of these hidden connections.
Absolutely. So maybe as you go about your week, here's a final thought to chew on, something provocative. Where else in your own life or just in the world you see around you might that accepted conventional wisdom be, well, maybe incomplete or maybe even totally wrong? What might you discover if you just looked at the data, looked for the hidden incentives from a fresh, maybe slightly rogue angle?